site
pull
plan.
up the site
You
plan.
understood sitting?
Okay, it was easy.
I
didn't even
think
feel it.
that's the plan.
Tom didn't do it.
Good evening, everyone.
He didn't have it. Had to go to.
I will now call to order the Duck Planning Board regular meeting of Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. Are there any public comments tonight? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll move to the third item on the agenda, which is new business. SUP-22-003 Application of Barnette Integrated Land Development on behalf of property owner Andrew Meredith for a special use permit to establish a duplex in the neighborhood commercial C1 district at 1448 Dune Road. The proposal would involve changing the use of the first floor unit from retail to residential use. No changes to the existing site or building exterior are proposed. I should have, before I call for that business on the agenda, I should have said initially, and I will say now, we're missing a member tonight, Mark Murray. Mark has COVID and is unable to be with us this evening.
Okay.
Sandy? 3A.
Chairman Cofield, actually, Joe is going to give this presentation, but we did want to clarify that this is for 1448 Duck Road, not Dune Road.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dune Road is probably fixed in my mind. Thank you, Sandy.
All right, with
Joe?
good reason. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've summarized the proposal as it appears on the agenda, and that's really what we're looking at tonight, is a change of use. The reason in that particular use requires a special use permit. As you, I think, aware, you had a recent text amendment that passed through the planning board that council recently approved, allowing duplexes in this commercial neighborhood district. So this was really the driving force behind that application and that amendment. So you're aware of what's occurred leading up to this. So the proposal is something that would amend a prior conditional use permit approval that was granted in 2014 at that time. And that was, this was actually I think the last that Andy Garman ever presented to you, my predecessor. And so I was here for the development of the property and implementation of the permit, but Andy was the one putting together the proposal. And I apologize because I will need you to speak clearly. So this is amending that 2014 approval. What happened in 2014 is that they replaced the several older buildings that were part of the water sports business and built a two-story structure with retail on the first floor, an apartment, one-bedroom apartment up above. And the proposal you have before you would simply change the retail use on that first floor to a three-bedroom apartment unit. So that's what you're reviewing tonight. So the good thing, the positive thing, is that the prior planning board had the opportunity to review this site at the time of its redevelopment, and they were able to work with the owner to bring a lot of aspects of the site that relate to this two-story building into compliance with the current town standards at that time, which have not changed, so they're still compliant in terms of that they paved parking area, that landscaping, the building itself was designed in a way to comply with town standards. So all of those different aspects that we would generally be looking at if we were looking at the redevelopment of a site or part of a site have already been accomplished on this site. So, as I hope you had the chance to thumb through the staff report and looking at the different aspects of the development and looking at the site plan. There are no physical changes that are proposed or required by the town as a result of this proposal. The main things that we ended up looking at were whether the 3-bedroom apartment would trigger a need for greater parking requirements, and that is not the case. It actually reduces them. So in other words, they have more parking on the site than we require. So they're okay from that standpoint. The other big thing has to do with the health department and the septic system. And it's our understanding the applicants may address that in more detail, but our understanding is that they have begun those negotiations to obtain a permit from the Dare County Environmental Health Department. And we don't know the extent of what they may or may not have to do, but we've addressed that with a proposed condition that requires them to get that permit from the health department prior to proceeding with any development. There's really not a great point in going through everything point by point since it already exists on site, but I did want to touch on the criteria for the special use permit and talk about how staff, give you staff's opinion on whether those are met. So the first of those criteria is that the use meets all required conditions and specifications of the ordinance. The subject property is large enough to establish a duplex, so it complies with that. And as I mentioned before, they brought this site into compliance in 2014 as part of the prior conditional use permit. So staff finds that the does comply with that first criteria. Second, the use does not materially endanger the public health or safety. We did not identify any issues or anything that would really change the way that this site functions. If anything, it would reduce the amount of activity coming and going from the site and within the site. So with that being the case, we found that they comply with finding two, with that condition that they meet the health department requirements, whatever those might be, if the existing system is not sufficient to accommodate the change of use and the existing development. Third, the use will not substantially injure the value of adjoining property unless a public necessity. we noted that this use is really minor in nature. You know, it wasn't a large retail unit to begin with, and a 3-bedroom apartment is not a really substantial change as far as generating traffic or other aspects. So with that in mind, we did not see any reason why this proposal would reduce or, for that matter, increase the value of adjoining properties. So again, staff found that the proposal complies with those. And finally, the fourth item is that the use will be in harmony with the area in which it's located and in general conformity with the comprehensive and capital land use plan. So a majority of the surrounding area is single-family residential. To be honest, most of those are greater than 3-bedroom units themselves. So we saw this change to a residential use as fitting into the surrounding area well. We didn't see any issue that would be likely to arise as far as compatibility with the surrounding area. And then as far as the comprehensive plan, you have a detailed item there on pages 7 and 8 where we list several of the objectives that relate to this type of proposal. And we just know for the record that in staff's opinion, this proposed special use is appropriately designed and scaled, does not involve additional site development, and would not negatively impact the surrounding area. So for those reasons, we felt the proposal was consistent with the comprehensive and land use plan. So with that, staff is recommending approval of this special use permit. And we are recommending that the board consider 3 conditions as part of your recommendation. First, the applicant must obtain approval from Dare County Environmental Health Department that the current septic system can accommodate the proposed change of use. If the board desires to broaden that condition, you may want to. There may be a change required, we don't know yet. But if there is, the applicants would have to implement that. So that may be something the board wants to consider. Just simplifying that they must obtain approval from Dare County Environmental Health without specifying the purpose. Second, recommended conditions that the applicant submit required application materials that obtain a building permit for any of the interior improvements associated with the conversion of this space from retail to an apartment. And finally, final inspection must be successfully completed and certificate of occupancy obtained before occupation of the apartment is allowed. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation, but I'd certainly be glad to talk in more detail about anything you would like.
Thank you, Joe. The applicant, we'll recognize the applicant now. Please state your name and your address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, good to see everybody, and especially good to see Mr. Hurd here this evening. I'm Bob Hornick from the Bro Law Firm in Chapel Hill. Our address is 1526 East Franklin Street, Suite 200, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I'm here on behalf of Mr. Meredith, the owner of the property, 1448 Duck Road, and Marty Barnette, who's the design professional working with Mr. Meredith on the application and the plan. There's really not much more that I feel like I need to say after Mr. Hurd's presentation, because he's covered the ground, covered the bases, and the staff report does likewise. You've all heard a couple months ago, I guess we were here talking to you about the text amendment that was, the impetus of the text amendment was this plan to convert the first floor back to an apartment use. Town council heard the same thing from us back in July or August, I guess it was. The text amendment was approved, and so here we are asking you for your recommendation of approval for the special use permit, which is essentially a modification of the original CUP that was issued in 2014. As Mr. Hurd described, and as the staff report indicates, the site and the site layout and the improvements on the site all meet current standards in the UDO. We realized, even if it was not a condition, one of the conditions of approval would be to get the Dare County Health Department's approval, so for any septic design for the property, if there needs to be any change. So we have no objection to that. It's something we would have to do anyway. So I just asked the board, I don't want to go on any longer than I need to, because I think we're all familiar with the project at this point, and we're happy to answer any questions or try to answer any questions that the board might have. Thank you.
Are there any questions to Attorney Cornick?
No, I think it's fine.
Hearing none, Mr. Meredith, Mr. Barnett, have anything to say?
I guess that concludes our presentation, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
Mr.
other
Chairman?
questions or comments?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. It might be in here, but I missed it. Joe, if it ever is decided to turn back to the original use, can that just happen like that?
The original use as retail would be that it does not require a special use permit for retail use in that district, so they wouldn't be able to go back as long as they comply with as long as the proposed use, whatever that retail use is, complies with the town standards.
Thank you, Joe.
Any other comments, questions? Board discussion? Joe, Randy?
No, I think I'm good.
No, I'm good too. I think it's a good proposal. Everything's already there.
Can I then ask for a motion?
Hello.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of SUP-22-003 with the attached 3 conditions.
Can I ask, as a friendly amendment to your motion, that the applicant must obtain approval from the Dare County Environmental Health Department, period, consistent with the staff recommendation?
Okay, that's acceptable?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and properly seconded that the motion be approved and the SUP-22-003 be
I'm sorry, can
approved
you
with 3 conditions. I'm sorry.
Can you
Sam.
clarify who seconded that motion?
Joe.
But that was with the three conditions, right? But the one being the septic system would have to be,
No. So the staff recommendation was, if you look at the staff
Yeah.
recommendation number 1, the applicant must obtain approval from the Dare County Environmental Health Department, period.
right.
Questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Hello. What's wrong with this thing?
The vote is 4-0 for approval.
Now you get back to the rocking chairs.
That was good. Quick and good.
Item 3B on the agenda is text amendment ordinance 22-09, regulatory standards for dune walkover structures. Sandy?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Cofield. You all may recall that a few months ago, we brought to you a zoning text amendment with regard to dune elevation requirements as they relate to setback exceptions. There was a little inconsistency in our ordinances where you can have a setback encroachment for walkways, provided they're no wider than 4 feet and no more than 12 inches above grade. Our dune management and our regulatory standards for structures in the primary and frontal dunes has a requirement that dune walkways and access ways be 18 inches above the dune and no more than 30. So there was a little bit of an inconsistency that we cleared up. As a result of that discussion, there was some question as to whether the 18 inches above the dune was necessary and or whether it was applicable to all of the oceanfront, since we have varying dune heights. We have the nourishment area. We have some areas that experience more erosion than others, some that experience accretion versus erosion. So for those that are in the audience, we had a special planning board meeting and were driven out on the beach on August 19th to take a look at the conditions in the various areas of town. And as a result of that, I'm hoping the planning board has some comments once we go through the staff report. Just for the audience's background, we have 2 sections of code that speak to dune. Chapter 94, which is in the legislative part of the town code, speaks to the beach and dune management. And in the definitions section of that section of the code, it says the dune walkover structure shall be constructed without a roof or walls, shall be elevated at least 18 inches above the dune, and shall extend east of the seaward vegetation line. The purpose in Chapter 94 is to preserve and enhance the natural function, aesthetic value, and protective qualities of the town's barrier, beach, and dune system. It hereby establishes regulations to permit reasonable uses and intrusions into the dune system and the ocean beach, consistent with sound beach and dune conservation practices. We also have a section in the zoning ordinance, or the land use section, subsection 156.124, which speaks to structures within the primary and frontal dunes and regulatory standards for dune walkovers. This section of the code says that the underside of the dune walkover structure across the primary or frontal dune shall be a minimum of 18 inches and a maximum of 30 inches above grade. They're slightly different, but they have the same basic premise with regard to the 18 inches above the dune. Just a little background. In about, I think it was 2009, we actually put in place our beach management ordinance that speaks to defining the dune system, defining access ways, improved and unimproved, defining what's acceptable on the beach with regard to tents, and driving and so on and so forth. Fast forward to 2012, we had Hurricane Sandy. Yes, that was me. And we had a pretty devastating impact from that hurricane. We lost, I believe, approximately 10 oceanfront homes, and literally within weeks, those property owners were seeking to rebuild their dune, their pools on a dune system that wasn't there any longer. Following that storm, staff went to council and presented concerns. We had residents and property owners that were presenting concerns about what was happening to our dune system. At the retreat in 2013, town council asked staff to research ways to further regulate, and we talked about setbacks for pools. That's when setbacks for pools came into play. Right now, under CAMA regulations, there are no specific setbacks from pools other than they must be constructed so that they have negligible impact to the dune and don't damage the integrity. There's no numbers associated. It's very, very subjective. During that process, we looked at a bunch of different things. I didn't include everything that we looked at in 2013, but I did include a couple items. One of the things that we looked at was a standard that Pine Island was putting in place and that they had used to help rein in some of the dune walkways that were 20 feet out onto the beach and 20 feet above the berm or the wet sand beach. Their regulations included 18 inches, and I don't know that they included 30 inches, and I don't have it off the top of my head. But that was kind of like the basis where we started. We also looked at CAMA regulations, and I noted in our staff report that CAMA regulations do not specify a required elevation for walkovers, but rather state in varying degrees that no alteration in section 0309, negligible alteration in 0308, or only alterations that are necessary to construct an access way in 0207 be permitted. Again, we're looking at very, very subjective language that can be interpreted in a number of different ways. A lot of CAMA's regulations are very lenient and subjective, and that's one of the reasons why the town has in place a 15-foot setback for dune decks and a 30-foot setback for accessory structures. That's why the town has in place a prohibition against sandbags. These are all things that are permitted by CAMA to be out on the ocean dune and in a dune system. Let's see. In 2013, these regulations at 156, 124 were implemented. Fast forward again, we have nourishment in 2017, and we have a different situation now. We have a huge beach that the town just spent $14 million on, and when you have hardened structures on the dune, they have the potential to cause damage to your dune system. If they are beat up by a storm and they end up rolling down the beach, they're going to hit somebody else's dune and so on and so forth. They also can be constructed in ways that are not necessarily good for the dune. So with a 70-foot berm down to a flat beach, town council prohibited hardened structures in the nourishment area. So we have a very defined area where you cannot have beach access ways. You can only have beach matting, which lays flat on the ground. So the distinction between nourishment and not nourishment is a very defined area. Okay, we have limits. It's from the south or the north end of the Corps of Engineers property up to, I believe, 140 or 138 Skimmer Way. Since 2017, we've seen a fair number of storms. The winter storms are often more impactful than the hurricanes, and in 2018, it's one of the winters that comes to mind specifically for me. 2018, we had a winter storm Grayson in January, which had a huge impact on both the north side of the town and the south side. The south side I specifically remember because we had 3 properties that we're looking at possible condemnation for their dune decks and gazebos, and they were in tides. March 2018, we have another hurricane, and I'm not another hurricane, another winter storm, and that was Winter Storm Riley. We had 6 feet of accretion on the beach, not on the dunes, but on the beach. So what my point is here is the beach is very, very dynamic. So just hold on to that thought. When we look at the dune system and we look at impacts to dunes, and when we looked back at in 2013 and started talking about dune deck and dune walkway elevations, there was a premise that the 18 inches is going to help kind of keep your dune walkway from getting covered with sand and your dune deck. 2, it's also going to have a negligible impact on the dune. When we see dune walkways that are getting covered over and people want to dig them out, then we then have a cut through, which is also bad. The 18 inches, is there scientific evidence that that's the right number? No. Is the 18 inches something that should be applied across the entire beach? Obviously, excluding the nourishment. Maybe, maybe not. The question becomes, when that beach changes from day to day, how do you then separate out one area from the next? So with that thought process, from a staff perspective, it's going to be very difficult to say, you're at 12 inches and you're at 18 inches. So if there's going to be a change, the one thing that staff is going to recommend is that it be across the board. Understanding that the beach, again, I'm going to say this over and over, is dynamic and it changes. I know that there have been comments made that it hasn't changed in 20 years, but it may not change 3 feet at one time, but it may change 6 inches, and you may not even notice it. We have these ground control points, and Sanderling folks have seen them, the little things with the black and white checks. In areas, tides, Tuckahoe is a good example. I go down there sometimes, and it's nearly covered, so we have to clear it out. It's hard to regulate by spots. One of the other things that town staff has done since 2006 is we've actually implemented we run our CAMA program. So through the state, we work with them, we issue permits on the ocean front. When we implemented the regulations in 156.124, we started going out and meeting with contractors before they actually construct their walkways. A lot of times, we're not seeing complete reconstruction of walkways. So if their walkway is right at grade, and then they've got this hump on the about 20 feet that's covered in sand, and they've got to either dig it out, which they can't do, or they got to build over it. And when I say they can't dig it out, I'll speak to my policy with that with regard to the CAMA stuff. If they're only building up and over a small section, we are not requiring them to build up 18 inches above that dune. We're requiring them to build it so that it's not covered. That's their choice. We're not requiring them to do that. What we are requiring is that if their walkways are getting covered over by more than 18 inches, or the middle rail, which has been our standard since about 2006 when I started doing the CAMA stuff, they've got to start thinking about building it up. If you choose to rebuild the entire walkway, yes, we are going to say you need to be 18 inches above grade. When we went out on the beach on the 19th, we saw the house down at 101 Ocean Crest. It was the last house we looked at. That house is about a year old. When that walkway was constructed, it was 18 inches above the dune. It's already filling in. So there is a benefit to the owners to simply be able to maintain their walkway without having to unbury it. Because once you get to 18 inches of buried sand, you can't, I'm not going to let you do it because I'm going to go back to the CAMO regulations, which are subjective, as I've applied them for the past 15 years, and say, you're damaging the integrity of the dune. So if we want to change the elevation, I'm going to go back to, staff would recommend keep it across the board, excluding the nourishment area. Once nourishment's done, we may come back and be revisiting nourishment as well, but for the time being, outside of the nourishment area, if you want to change that required 18-inch elevation, I would recommend it be across the board. With that, I will entertain questions.
Sandy, I have a few questions.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I have one more thing for you. I apologize. We did do some research on some other communities, and for the most part, none of the local communities, aside from the town of Duck and the town of Southern Shores, have regulatory standards speaking to the elevation above or the maximum elevation of a dune walkway or deck. And I just got this. I can speak to it. I'm not going to be able to speak to it in its entirety, but I would like to speak to that.
So Sandy, in the other communities that you looked at, what do they do when the sand builds up on top of those walkways?
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I can't say that I've ever talked to anybody about it.
Yeah.
You know, they may allow them to dig it out. I'm looking at a level of protection for the dune consistent with the purpose in Chapter 94 and a similar purpose in Chapter 156, 124 to protect the dune system. So when do you start degrading the integrity of that dune by digging out? The dune's going to go where it's going to go. So if you can plan for it and plan accordingly, you might get yourself 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years. In some cases down in Bias Shores, you might get yourself 20 years. It really depends. But if you're not having a dune building up situation, like in Bias Shores, this doesn't apply to you because you're not rebuilding your dune deck or your dune walkway. You might replace some deck boards here and there, but you're not replacing it in its entirety because if you do, you're going to end up having to meet some ADA requirements that you're not going to want to have to deal with. So the application of this is a very small number. You're talking about new construction, and I can think of 2 oceanfront dune walkways in the past year. One is one of the reasons why we're here today, because of the last zoning text amendment. Sea Colony just rebuilt theirs in its entirety. And they made it so that it was 18 inches above grade. You can't even notice it. Mr. Leahy sent an email to a couple of the planning board members, not all of them, and a couple of council members. So I'm just going to read it into the record. James and Joe, the town has been permitting beach access stairs under the residential code versus commercial code that actually applies. I'm going to stop and I'm going to interject as I read through this. He is correct when it comes to community access ways. As a result of Mr. Leahy's inquiries with us and his drawings that he would like us to support with regard to beach access ways, our building inspector did some research, did some digging, and the Department of Insurance came back and said, if it's a community access way and it serves more than one person, then you need to meet the commercial standard. Absolutely. What we have done historically and what most of the building inspectors on the Outer Banks have done is they have maintained a level of reasonableness when it comes to oceanfront development on the dune. Less is more. If you are building a set of steps at a residence, you need to have stair treads and kickers, risers. When we're building steps on the beach, we don't require them. They are a further impediment. They are a wall if water hits them, and they can cause more damage to the dune than if there's no risers. So as a standard, we have never required risers for beach stairs. We have also not required the residential code requirement for rails, provided the walkway was not more than 30 inches above grade. That means that you can have vertical pickets if you want them, but we're not going to require you to meet the minimum 4-inch sphere spacing or maximum 4-inch sphere spacing. Or you can have horizontal rails, and we are not going to require, the same requirement is 4-inch sphere. So you'd have typically 4 rails. In a beach walkover situation, we would require a top, middle, bottom rail. That again allows water to pass through, allows sand to pass through, with the intent of being less impactful to the dune system when we have storms. Going back to Mr. Leahy's letter. As a result, their underlying assumptions are flawed. The correct code has a maximum riser height of 7 inches, which extends the stairs further and obviously requires more risers. I'm not a building inspector, and I think you have between 7 and 8.25 inch risers required. I'm not going to be able to speak to that. For instance, staff has told me that after 12 risers on the beach side, the applicant can turn the stairs perpendicular to the dune. That is not what the ordinance says. That is not what was said to Mr. Leahy. If there's more than a 12-foot vertical rise, not risers, that equates to about 16 steps. Then you are required to put a turn in, and that is in our regulatory standards. That has been in place, again, since 2013. I work with contractors all the time, and it's a rare occasion that they cannot get steps down to the beach in 16 steps. If we were dealing with a situation like the nourishment, before the nourishment, absolutely, because we had a 20-foot high dune and a drop-off, like a cliff. We're not dealing with that. That's only, well, he says that's only 7 feet of rise in a 12-rise stair, which would not get close to the bottom of the dune. Again, he's mixing up terminology. Also, they propose making the walkway surface clear the dune by 18 inches. By code, any walking surface 18 inches or greater above the grade requires 42-inch guardrails. Again, I'm not going to be able to speak to that. That's a building code thing. I think he's thinking of commercial situations. I know that if you're not more than, in a residential setting, if you're not more than 30 inches above grade, you don't need rails at all. I know that. So he goes on also doing the math, 18 inches above the dune, then 2x8 construction and 2x4 deck boards equals 27.25 inches above the dune. So not only will it require guards, it will require 4 risers to get back down to the dune, surface with both guards and graspable handrails at the stairs. Way too much math for me, not the building inspector. One of the staff comments that rings in my ears is their stated desire to limit the amount of construction on the dune, which I support. But by proposing an 18-inch clearance over the dune, the result will be more construction. Our focus should be to get the terminal run of stairs to land at the nearest point practical on the dune and limit the walkway as much as possible and not create a stair at the end of the walkway back down to the dune top. I agree. But I don't think the 18 inches is creating this problem. I support a community beach access standard and a primer template for property owners and communities. We know, we have been working with him on this for, it's probably been 3 months since I've heard from him, but we have been working with him. I would be glad to continue to work with the town staff on this endeavor, but in the meantime, our town should utilize, apply, and enforce the correct code. And again, I will speak to, I would say that he is interpreting this incorrectly. And since our building inspector spoke with the Department of Insurance, we are now and will be in the foreseeable future enforcing on all community access ways to a community standard, to a commercial standard. I don't know that that was his intent, but that's where we're going to end up. Community access ways are different than residential. I don't know that Mark is planning on, or trying to distinguish between the two, but there is a distinct difference between the two. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Actually, you answered one of my questions when you began your presentation, which was what standard do other towns of Outer Banks use? And if I heard you correctly, it's with the exception of Southern Shores, there's not a standard for other towns on the Outer Banks.
My expectation is they probably all rely on CAMA, which, as I noted in my staff report, is pretty subjective.
Actually, I wanted, before further questions from board members, are there any questions or comments from anyone in the audience?
If you're going to have to go up. If you can state your name and address, Terry.
Terry Cullen, 122 Martin Lane in Sanderling. I've been following this since the town became a town because been here since 1985, probably longer than everybody else in this room. And I've seen the changes, and I've seen what we've done in Sanderling as private homeowners to try to build up our dunes, which, as you know, in that section in SPOA, the dunes are deeper and higher than anywhere else in the town. Our problem is not, I don't have a problem at all with 18 inches setting a standard. I understand the reason for a standard. What I have a problem with is that over the years, we've been told a number of different things. When we have an accretion of sand, that's great, which I have in my mind, definitely. Since the nourishment program, we have gained 4 foot of sand height. We cannot access the beach with the current directions that we get. I don't think they're not regulations that you do, right? The directions we get. We cannot access the beach. We were never allowed to dig out. We were never allowed to even broom it out in the beginning. I have 3 structures underneath my dune walkover, 3. So what's happening as the sand comes over, okay, it either exposes one of those structures underneath, or if we lose sand, and then it pops up, and it's extremely dangerous for us to walk down to the beach because of this. We have flags on every step almost going down. We've lost 13 steps with sand in the last 2 years. So it's an entirely different situation, really, I guess, than what you're really dealing with now. But I just wanted to say, if there's any wiggle room at all, it's got to be in saying to the homeowners like me that, you know what, you can shovel some out, you know, so you can have a safe passage down to the beach. That's my only comment.
Question, Terry, what would you say the remedy is?
Just be a little bit more flexible when it comes to that type of thing. I would say our dunes are probably 40 foot deep, okay? That's a lot of sand to go through for an event. So I'm thinking that what happens, you know, now I've got at least easily about a 7 foot height that I have to get down to the beach that's straight down, and you slide down because it's all sand, and then you hit these things that are sticking up and whatever, and then of course then you have the flat beach. So that's a lot to navigate around. And ours is a private boardwalk, so I would assume that a lot of this new stuff would not apply to that. But all I'm asking is that we get a little bit of consideration when it comes to those types of rules. You know, let us shovel it out if we can. The last time I was with Joe, you didn't come over. It was Andy. one of the rules you put in, when we went to change the decking and whatever, would have meant that a bulldozer had to come in to my 40-foot deep, dune system there to put the size pilings in that you wanted. And of course, Andy immediately realized that that was not going to work, and he gave us an exception for that. And that's all I'm asking is, 18 inches is fine, but there's a lot of us that have an entirely different dune structure than elsewhere in town.
Good evening, Dennis Zanger. I live at 118 Spyglass Road in the Sea Ridge community. I agree with the previous speaker. My observation in our walkway through to the ocean it's been increasingly covered in the past 12 months or so, and just being able to dig out the sand as it drifts in and allowing passage would be a great benefit for everybody that lives in our community that is now walking over that sand. Again, that structure, when it was put in after the last beach nourishment, was, I believe, to code, but the beach has shifted and has started to cover up the top of the access. I can only imagine with the new nourishment that's coming up to start in November that it'll probably worsen.
Tony Parisi, 1540 Duck Road. I have two questions. One, if the commercial standards are going to start applying to walkways, what is that going to mean exactly? How is that going to change if we have to rebuild the walkway? And I'm talking about not a residential one, one that's the Property Owners Association.
So I'm going to go backwards from Tony. The commercial standard has a different height requirement for rails. Residential, I believe, is 34 inches, and I believe 34 to 36, and I think commercial is 38 to 42. So you would have to have a higher rail. Again, when we're dealing with, and as we have in the past, we would only require a top, middle, and bottom rail, provided the walkway was not more than 30 inches above grade. That's not going to be, that's going to go away when you're talking about a commercial access. You're going to have to meet the standard rails that you would have at a house. So when you have pickets and you have horizontals, you can't have more than a 4-inch sphere pass through, which means you're going to have to add at least one more rail if you're doing horizontals. And if you're doing verticals, you'd have to have, you don't see verticals on the beach very often just because they get beat up pretty quickly. Did that answer your question?
Second question is about clearing. In the beach nourishment area, you only allow mats. We've done that in one beach access in Sanderling. What's that? Martin Lane. And over the past year since it's been put in, it's been covered by more than 18 inches, and you told us we cannot remove more than 18 inches. In my mind, that would actually be better for the dune. If we can pick up that mat, remove the sand temporarily, and put it back on top of the sand, we're actually protecting the dune more than it would be, and still give people access. So what happens in the beach nourishment area with the matting?
You're going to have another question. So beach nourishment, matting, there are probably about 5 communities that have beach access matting. They take their matting up. If they want to preserve it, they take it up. Member Morton can speak to that. They put it out in the beginning of the season, and then they take it up at the end of the season. I would like to speak to my policy, since I've been doing CAMA stuff, has always been 18 inches. And I regularly meet with contractors about where the steps can go out to, how far they need to be, how far you need your walkway before you start your steps. So our door may be locked, but it's always open. And so, you know, to Terry's comments, got to get me out there to talk about it. We haven't been out to your place since before Chris was here, and it was probably, I want to say, 6 years ago. Right, I remember going out there. I remember the comments specifically, you know, we're tired of building up and over. You have to weigh the challenges of building up and over versus digging a hole through it. In the event that we get a storm like Hurricane Isabel or Hurricane Sandy again, if there's a cut through, that's an opening for the ocean to come over and impact residential structures. Mr. Zanger's comments. The nourishment area is different. You know, we definitely have had sand build up, but we also constructed a 20-foot wide by 20-foot tall dune that in Sea Ridge and Osprey, it desperately needed it, and it's not all there yet still. I mean, like, if we don't do this, then there's going to be residential losses at some point. Are there going to be impacts to your walkways? Absolutely. In the nourishment area, town council has made a decision that they do not want hardened structures impacting that beach. Hardened structures, again, if they get beat up by a storm, they're not just sitting there. They're going somewhere else, and they're hitting it up. The sand fencing, you know, in the nourishment area, we cut the sand fencing when it starts dangling because it's going to cause damage. What's going to happen in the nourishment area after the nourishment? I can't tell you. It's going to be different than last time, and when it happens, we'll start talking about it. I can assure you of that. I can't wrap my head around how it's going to occur this time in comparison to last time. We may have to go back to allowing steps in the nourishment area, depending on how it all pans out. There may be some areas where they don't need steps because they still have this gradual decline to the water. But as you get further south in the nourishment area, from about Bufflehead to the core property, we're likely going to see places that may need steps. We are seeing those areas their steps are being exposed. I've got Snow Geese has steps exposed, Carolina Dunes has steps exposed, Port Trinity has steps exposed. There's one property at 145 Bufflehead that had a set of steps put in by Whit Patterson, Almar bulkheads before the nourishment, and those steps are fully exposed right now, and those steps haven't gone anywhere. But they were built with round pilings, which far exceeds what we would want to see for dune construction related to walkovers. Have I answered everybody's questions? Not Tony. Oh, digging. You know, you have to, again, I'm going to go back to you have to weigh where do you draw the line between damaging the integrity and impacting your dune system. Is it 6 inches? Is it 12 inches? Is it 18? Is it 24? What I did years ago was I looked at a walkway and I'm like, look, if you're over the middle rail, because you got the top, middle, and bottom rail, that's a lot of sand. You're not maintaining your walkway. There is a solution to dealing with this, and that's simply maintaining the walkway and planning to build up and over it. Because if the sand's gonna, if you were trying every day and you're maintaining it and it's still filling up, there is no hope. You're gonna have to build up. That's Mother Nature saying to you, I wanna be here, figure it out. I'm not talking about walkways, I'm talking about the matting. The matting and the Right. But if it's matting, it can be rolled up and it can be hauled off. And now I understand you guys chose to put wood matting down, which is much heavier, but there were alternative options.
Sandy, if I may address that one thing about the matting. In Osprey and Sea Ridge also, they have matting. Like you said, during the season, the matting goes down. And in the off-season, that matting comes up. And it won't go back down until the next on-season. Also, during the season, if we have a nor'easter, that mat comes up. And if you have sand blowing from that nor'easter, because that's where the sand is going to blow up from, coming off the beach to the northeaster and build on top of that dune, and then we take that mat and we put it back down. Now, in those areas, we've been cut out as the northern beaches have. With the beach nourishment was put there, we had a lot of dune lost and beach lost. And the town has done some pools down to allow access to come down to the beach.
And that is done as part of the CAMA major permit for the beach nourishment to maintain its repair and maintenance for the dune. That's why we are allowed to grade that. You're not in the nourishment. Terry said, so we are not allowed to grade at all. And I responded with, they are not in the nourishment area. So anyone that talks has got to talk into the mic, because this is all live stream. So if you don't talk into the mic, people out in the public, and I know you don't want to be seen on television, but you're going to be heard.
All right. The reason that we have all the accretion that we have then, and we're glad for it, we're happy for that, okay? But the interpretation of the town's rules have been so different about what we can do and what we can't do. And so we had given up because we were told we couldn't even sweep unless it was to the beach down the bottom, okay? Which anything that you do is going to land on the beach, all right? And it just seems so unfair that we have the situation where we have been working for years to do a dune system, as you saw, you know. Our homeowners have done that. We've done that. We need to have some more flexibility. We need to have some relief so that we don't have structures underneath that are impacting just access to the flat beach now. And that's all really, that's all we need. I think we really need it up there in those areas. I know you're talking about mats not on a cliff like we have. You're talking about mats that are almost already level. And to me, that there's a huge difference between, you know, what a mat will do in our area and what a mat does in the other areas. Am I correct? It is fairly flat.
Are the dunes? No, the dunes are pretty steep. They go down pretty steep, and the mat is a benefit, being able to walk up there much easier along with the post rail system. Okay. But after beach nourishment was done, those beaches were pretty flat out there, and we had mats going out there as well.
Right. Okay. But you do have a really good handrail system too. And how far is that allowed to go out?
The hand and rail system down to the toe of the dune.
Just the toe of the dune. Because ours is a lot bigger.
And the mat only goes to the toe of the dune as well.
Yeah, okay.
Just additional comment on the mat. My observation is the mat, generally, since there's so much traffic going down on the mat, eventually that packs down the sand, and that makes it for a more controlled slope down that hill. At the beginning of the season, certainly after we had some of the spring storms, it was much steeper, but the mat, after putting the mat down, that starts to settle it down, so it actually makes it more of a walkable surface to go down from the platform at the top of the dune. We have plenty of people doing that all the time, myself included.
Sandy, before we begin a discussion, further discussion, let me ask just a couple of questions. The 18 inches applies, it's not clear to me where that standard applies. Is it at the highest point of the dune? Is it at the beginning on the east side where the stairs go down, or is it on the west side? where are we talking about the 18, the
No.
measurement of the 18 inches?
That's a really good question, because we had a property owner recently ask us, they said, I want to, you know, my dune walkway is starting to get covered, and I would like to raise it up. And I may or may not be able to draw this. Might have Jim come help me. You got it? He said, you know, this is the elevation of my walkway. I've been digging it out, because I can dig out up to 18 inches. So I've got a sand buildup on either side. So he's got this, basically, a dune like this, the walkway right here, a dune like this. I said, well, you have to elevate it 18 inches, or you can, he's only doing a part of it, so he doesn't have to elevate the whole thing. He can elevate whatever. We encourage 18 inches, but you can't get more than 30 inches. He said, well, where am I measuring that from? Am I measuring it from here? Or am I measuring it from down here at the walkway? So, you know, my gut says measure from here, because we don't want the walkway up here. But that's something we can certainly discuss in this conversation, because Tim brought that up. He said it's not clear. So this is the walkway. This is the dune build-up from where they've been digging it out. Now they want to elevate it. This gentleman wanted to use this as his starting point to go up 30 inches. My gut would be 18 inches here, but no more than 30 inches.
You're asking, it's going to fill in.
It is.
It's going to get covered in it.
Right.
If you do it that way, it's going to get covered.
So what's the answer? But
Addresses part of it,
Right.
because I've seen this.
right. But this is the weak link to our barrier system. If that doesn't fill in, when we have a storm, that's where it's going through. Sorry, let's just share this with the rest of the members. This circle, this hole right here is our weak link. Sorry, YouTube. Can they see this? Okay, great.
Some of the question is, are we seeing 18 inches from the top of the dune, or from the frontal slope, or where on the west side, where the walkway gets?
If this is the west side and this is the east side, I think our concern is here. Over the top of the dune and on the east side. But then again, the steps, typically, we keep the steps as a standard pretty tight to the dune. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to have a dune up here with a walkway and steps out here. We want the steps close to the dune. It's the walkway that's the concern. And again, I'm not wed to this 18 inches, but I'm going to tell you for 15 years, I've been using 18 inches as a standard for digging out. And then in 2013, we put in place the regulatory standards that said you have to elevate 18 inches. Good practice so that you don't have to do it next year or the year after.
I'm with you, but again, there's a difference in elevation on these three.
Absolutely.
And so where does under this proposal, where does the 18, are we measuring from here or here?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. The beach is dynamic. So from today, 18 inches right here is where I'm measuring from. It may be 16 here, it may be 12 here. The beach is dynamic. Does that answer? Are we done with the drawing? Because I'm a really bad drawer.
And Sandy, I guess in your drawing down there at the bottom, where you were talking about if you're 18 inches on the top part of the dune, depending on the steepness of that dune, that frontal part may be a lot farther up than 18 inches because the sand had been eaten out.
It may.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the beach is dynamic. I cannot say this enough. So every time, or in a dune walk, I mean, I get a fair amount from Sanderling of dune walkway extensions because the beach has grown to the east. That's great. That's what we want to see happen. Whenever we get a permit from them, and Joe Bukaitis will tell you, I meet Joe Bukaitis and Brian Smith all the time, and Ken Green, and I've been out to SPOA and do the same thing there. We always go out, we always meet on site, we figure out where the dune steps need to stop, where the dune steps need to start. Consistent with our regulations to the extent that we can be, because the beach is.
That's what a barriolum is, right? It moves in and moves out.
So I will just go back to the purpose of both of these regulations are to preserve the dune system, you know, the natural environment. And to the extent that we can do that, that's what we're looking at. And if planning board feels that we need to modify that elevation, great. Trying to make it unique to this one area or this one subdivision versus this one is going to be difficult because the beach is dynamic.
Sandy, are there other questions? I think the real important phrase in your comments, which I totally agree with, is that the beach is dynamic.
The beach is what?
Dynamic. And to me, it cries out for flexibility because the beach is dynamic. Flexibility because it might change from June to October in one area, but also because along the 6-mile stretch of oceanfront in Duck, it is so different in the different areas. In my area, I have steps, a walkover, a boardwalk, walkover, steps. And so the boardwalk and the walkover, not the steps, have not changed in 35 years. 35 years it's been there, hasn't changed. Talking about dynamic and flexibility, so I see no need, none whatsoever, to implement an 18-inch minimum standard walkover when my dune structure, the top of the dune hasn't changed in 35 years. Might change tomorrow, but in 35 years it hasn't changed. And we have other areas in Duck where it changes in 5 years. I mean, we're initiating another beach nourishment because it's changed so much in 5 years in the area of the municipal service district. I guess I am also leaning toward giving the same kind of recognition for this that the town has already implemented with respect to beach nourishment. The town recognizes the dynamic changes along the 6-mile stretch. That's why they didn't say beach nourishment for 6 miles and up. It was where it was needed. And I think this issue cries out for the same kind of flexibility. And again, I'm reticent to put my own situation and make it personal, but my dune, my walkover hasn't changed in 35 years. It's been there for 35 years, and it looks the same now that the way it looked 35 years ago when it was constructed. What's changed a little is the stairs going down to the beach, but this is not about the stairs, this is about the walkover. And there are some areas in Duck that need it. You know, whether it's 18 inches or 24 inches or 12 inches, who am I to say? I think the dynamic nature of this problem cries for flexibility. And I, for one, would like for you to have the flexibility when you go out and look within some parameters, and maybe we just haven't established those parameters yet. And I think it requires for flexibility depending upon the specific circumstances of that site.
And I feel like I do that on a regular basis.
I'm sorry, you feel like you what?
I feel like I do that on a regular basis,
Right, and I'm,
except for you're not going to dig out more than 16 or 18 inches. That's the only thing that I have consistently, and I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, Terry, consistently held when I meet with contractors and when I meet with new presidents on a regular basis from different communities, typically in Sanderling. 18 inches, maintain your walkway. And if you can't maintain your walkway, then you should be thinking about bringing it up. That's just good practice. That's planning. That's, you know, looking out for the best interests of your community, because you have an asset there. You have an asset and a liability. So if you're not preparing for those situations, then you're doing your community a disservice.
is that not an appropriate standard guide for you to continue to use?
Do I think it's an inappropriate guide?
No, is that not, shouldn't you be able to continue to do that?
I think that is, I think that if I change my standard now, then I'm going to have all kinds of people screaming at me that I'm not consistent. And that's the last thing I want to be, is inconsistent.
No, I'm saying giving you the flexibility to make that judgment on site, because you're not going to make that judgment if you look at my property.
Oh, you mean making the judgment as to whether you need to elevate it 18 inches or more, or at least 18 inches? I mean, again, I'm going to say the beach is dynamic. So it's not always exactly 18 inches. If Mark Murray was here tonight, he would say the elevation today on the beach is going to be different than it is tomorrow. So do I have flexibility? Absolutely. I don't go out there with a tape measure. Rarely, if ever, do I go out with a tape measure to look at a dune walkway and its elevation above the dune. There is a base, there's a guide, there's, you know, like, can I see under it? You know, is there room for dune grass to grow, or is there room for sand to blow under it? That's what I'm going to be looking at. I'm not taking a tape measure and saying, you're at 17 inches, you need to make it another inch higher. Because tomorrow it could be 18 inches if the wind blows it out. Or it could be, you know,
Sandy,
inches.
a couple of things that kind of hit my head is that, I mean, we're talking about new development, new walkways that are coming in.
New walkways
Not
or
replacing the existing
complete-
walkways that are there.
Right.
Now, if we don't, it's my belief that if we don't have a standard in the ordinance and we say, oh, it could be this one at this place and this at this place, and there's not a standard there, then you open yourself up for some lawsuits. People to come in, because I could say, James, you did one thing and I can't do that, that's not right. So I think we're opening ourselves up and exposing ourselves to that. The other thing, James, going back in yours, and you and I went and looked at that, would you not say that on the sides of your platform that you've got, that sand is higher than what your platform is?
Yes.
And your platform is a 6-foot, I believe, platform, which for access you could do that. I'm not sure if it's bigger than that or not. I was just guessing, but I guess I would submit to you that if you did not have that platform there or clean off sand, then your platform would be under sand, the height that it has raised up. So I would say your beach has changed, because on those nor'easters, that wind has got to be blowing sand up and that grass has got to be catching it. And the other thing there is under your platform, you have grass. you have a growth there that has stabilized that dune. And here we're talking about fresh sand with a walkway under there, building an area that you can gather, grow vegetation underneath there to catch the sand, and that'll build up. As we've heard, it building up at one end of the beach. I would imagine it wouldn't be as drastic, but if you didn't clean that off, you would be building up as well, I would think.
Yes and no. The no part of it is you're assuming a buildup over the years, and I would say absolutely not. Or that when it was originally built, it was 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches
Whatever else.
above the ground level. And I'm saying no. My assumption is, and I don't have a photo 35 years ago, is that it was built at ground level then. There's certainly a little buildup on either side. But you know, in my area, the dune is protected. So again, I think this whole discussion is that it, to me, cries for flexibility. The town had flexibility or recognized the dynamic, to use Sandy's term, which I totally agree with, nature of what's happening on our oceanfront, because it set out a new criteria in town, the municipal service district. Created a whole new district just to do beach nourishment. Otherwise, it would have required beach nourishment along the 6-mile stretch in Duck. So I think this is a fluid, dynamic, moving issue we're talking about, and I think the solution cries for flexibility.
I want to ask a question, might not understand this. The other towns that have no standard, it's a question to Sandy, and I don't know if you know, but do they require the dune walkover structures to be above, off the ground?
I do not know. They don't have any regulations, so I might ask my community planner if he can maybe take a second and come up to the podium. This is Jim Gould, for those of you that don't know him. He's community planner extraordinaire.
So thank you, Sandy. Yeah, so I helped compile some of that research, and in talking with the different towns, they did not have standards. They went along with what CAMA recommended, which is sort of ambiguous, as we've learned tonight. The one thing that they feared in not having standards when I brought it to their attention was that people may be able to build extremely high dune walkovers that would obstruct the view of their neighbors. And already in the Sanderling area, we've had that come to our attention that neighbors are concerned about people building too high. But that being said, a lot of them did say that they like to promote the growth of grass along their dunes. And one town did say that they don't like having the holes through their dunes from where people have consistently dug out. So if that helps at all in that research, but
well, back to that.
Specifically, Nags Head was
If you
worried
said,
about people
if you
building
said
too high.
these towns, municipalities are deferring to CAMA, or it's to not damage the dune, do you know, are they all building some distance above the dune, or are they putting the walkover right smack dab
I
on the
believe
dune?
in the CAMA guidebook from April 2014, it says that you should not have the structure touching the dune. It should be the least invasive or destructive as possible and allow for sand to pass freely underneath that dune walkway. It speaks to that.
So if we don't approve of the standard, then we're leaving it up,
You're leaving it totally subjective to my
burdening
determination.
the staff with having to make those decisions with no guidelines at all. And I don't know if, I don't know, I'd like to know what the staff, do y'all like to work within these standards, even if we, and if so, we might, the next question, do y'all recommend changing from 18 to 30 to 12 to 30, or, you know, are y'all looking for a standard?
I am very comfortable with the existing standard. As I've said a couple times, I meet with contractors and homeowner associations regularly to talk about what they can and cannot do. If you want to change the ordinance and leave it flexible, I would simply refer to CAMA, which, you know, they have 3 different references, and they are all, as Jim said, very ambiguous and open to subjectivity. I understand Chairman Cofield's request for flexibility. That's why we meet on site. That's why I've said several times, the beach is dynamic. Am I out there with a tape measure to see if you're 18 inches? I am not. Most of the contractors you work with, they know the standard. They know that we're looking for new construction to be 18 inches above the dune. They know that we're looking for them to plant grasses around it. When we're dealing with existing community access ways and they're only elevating a small portion, we are not requiring them to elevate 18 inches. We may encourage it, but you don't have, if you're just doing a small portion, it's good business, you know? If you have a big pile of sand in the middle of your walkway and you just take it up to that sand level, and we're talking 4 feet, you're only taking it up 4 feet, and like, sandling is a unique situation. We have seen just piles of sand in one small section of a walkway. It's too much to unbury. They've got to go up and over, but it's only for like a 20-foot section. It's bizarre. Can't tell you why, but Mother Nature wants that sand there. I'm not saying those folks need to build that walkway steps up and 18 inches over that hump of sand. Saying if they're going to take out or they're going to reconstruct that entire walkway, you're going to build it 18 inches above the grade. And that still could be subject to discussion. Flexibility, you can give it to us, but trust me when I say we're going to get criticism. I already know who they're coming from.
Say that again.
We're going to get criticism, and I know exactly where they're coming from.
And if we do get to the point where we're looking at changing from a firmer type of standard to something flexible, I do think we need to get the town's attorney involved in that conversation. I think there were good points made by both Mr. Morton and Mr. McKeithen, that really potentially opens the town up to legal challenges. And as Sandy said, they're not all necessarily legal challenges, but questioning staff as to why you require this here but not here. Yeah. I think that really becomes difficult for the town from a legal standpoint, and we can get interpretation from the town attorney if that is something that the board would like to consider moving forward. We can have them speak to that issue at least.
Thank you. Other comments, board members?
I had one more. If we recommended to council to giving staff more flexibility, like 12 to 30, would that be good, and would that create, and the second question is, would that potentially create legal issues? I mean, you've still got standards, but if you changed them to say 12 to 30, would that get you more criticism?
It has to be elevated?
I think we're saying right now it's between 18 to 30 inches in the one, and he's just saying if we widen that, made it
because of all the differences in your,
mean-
it seemed like it would give
Well,
you more
that's,
flexibility, but we still have established a standard.
One of the, option number 2, I put in there, dune walkover structure shall be constructed without roof or walls, shall be elevated at least X inches above the dune. So, that's one of the things I left up to planning board is, if you want to change this, what's a good number for you? I think 12 would be the minimum. I would go, but, that's my
Well, this
perspective.
proposal, though, that the option 2, I reckon we could change it, but it says elevated to, let's see, it doesn't give a range from,
Right, so there's 2 sections. You have Chapter 94, which is just a definition, and that one has, it
you're
says
right,
that
I'm sorry.
on the first page,
Yes, I'm
dune
sorry.
walkover access improved says, dune walkovers, it currently says they shall be elevated at least 18 inches, no change. Option 2, elevate at least X inches above the dune.
You're right, I didn't read it right. So you can come up with, you still got you're maintaining the maximum, if you wanted to leave it
I
at
think-
30, and we could give staff more flexibility.
I think as Jim mentioned about the other communities having concern that you could build as high as you want, I think having a maximum is a good standard. One of the other things about that 30 inches as well is 30 inches triggers a higher building standard. If you're more than 30 inches above grade in a high velocity or coastal high hazard area, you must meet the V zone standard, which would get to Terry's concern, which you have to bring in 6x6s and you have to sink them 16 feet in the ground. We do not want that on our dunes. That's why we have setbacks in place for dune decks now. They have to be set back 15 feet. So, you don't have to have that substantial impact to the dune with the pilings. So to the extent that we can keep things below 30 when you're talking about community or residential walkways, I think that's definitely going to be a benefit to the dune system. I'm waiting on you, Joe.
Hello,
You're there.
I'm here. I think it's a little confusing. I think if we're going to do anything, we need to stick with your standards because you're the one who's doing all the work. I'm a little confused in one particular area, Mr. Chairman. I get it that yours hasn't changed because I've seen it. Why is that so important? Really, why is it so important? I don't get it.
Is that a question to me or to Sandy?
Yeah, to you.
Oh, let me answer. There's an old axiom that I tend to fall back on, which is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, okay. I'm not being facetious
No,
here.
I'm not either, but
I just don't understand.
No, but why would you require me, if I were to build it, because I never do that, because I never do more than 49%. But if I were, why would you require me to raise my,
What would require you to do that?
if I would do 51%?
Okay. Why would you do 51%?
I wouldn't, I'd never do that.
Unless you had to.
I would never do it, period, because I wouldn't have to.
Okay.
Unless it was taken up.
All right. It's if we did nothing now and thought about it, I don't think we would come to any different solution right now. I think it ought to be thrown out right now. I mean, throw it out on the table. What is the real thing to do? I'm with you on what you talk about, but the numbers I'm okay with. But whether we should do it, that's up to the board. Austin. We have to do something.
I see two options. One, we can vote on the proposal in front of us.
Say that again, I didn't hear.
One, we can vote on the proposal that is in front of us, the staff recommendation, or I would suggest we take it under advisement and continue this discussion because a number of issues have come out tonight, so.
Oh, I see.
What issues would you want me to jot down?
Flexibility being one. A goal that we'd like to get to, a goal that I would like to get to, flexibility. That recognizes the, using your word, the dynamic nature of the beach in Duck.
Okay, I got a question to that now. Sounds good, but you're marching along and all of a sudden everything gets thrown out of your area. Your dune is just busted all up and it's this deep and everything else, okay? What do you do then? If they want you to come and replace it, what do you do? What do anybody do?
Then probably we would be to the 18-inch standard.
Because that would be the only thing left, like to do, or?
I'm just not sure. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I'm not either. And if you're flexible, as you say, flexible, you can't. If you're in ruin there, how flexible can you be? It's really.
It just depends.
Yeah.
No clear answer.
I can see doing what you just said. Think about it. I'm just don't know what we could possibly come up with. But, Joe, do you have anything to add to that? If we did this, what?
I think the only way that you can institute, and again, we can get the town attorney to comment on this, but I think the only way that you can get to a point of having flexibility is by changing these from standards that are in the town code to guidelines, where you might have more general statements about the intent of what the town is seeking to do, but they're not enforceable. I mean, that gives staff flexibility to, to try to do what they can to meet the intent while meeting the needs of individual owners, but you lose the ability to enforce that. So if somebody walked in and said, oh, well, I want to build this grandiose thing that's 10 feet in the air so that my renters will have the best views on the beach, we have no way of saying no. And so there's an upside to flexibility, there's a downside to flexibility, and that would be something we could have some further discussions about, because I understand the desire to have that, but that's my take as we look at that.
Mr. Chairman, one more stupid question from me to Sandy. Sandy, James says be flexible, and then you have your input on how you would do it. If you're flexible, what does that mean? What would that mean to you?
I mean, flexible means meeting somebody on site, walking the area, looking at the existing conditions, and talking through a solution that works for the town, that is consistent with our regulations, and again, to the extent that we can, because the beach is dynamic, and that works for the owners. I mean, I can't describe that any differently. That's how I do it. That's how we condition our permits.
That's how I would think you would do it.
That reaches my goal of flexibility.
So why couldn't we go along with that flexibility? You get out there anyhow and tell them what to do.
This regulation. This regulation is what we use there is always a little bit of wiggle room because.
Oh, I wouldn't stop the dimensions that you were mentioning at all. I wouldn't mess with them. I think they're okay. Just the flexibility that throws I don't.
But I don't really think you can say, okay, here's the ordinance has got to be 18 to 30 inches, but we're going to be flexible. I don't think that you can really say that.
Well, that's just the question I asked.
Yeah.
So I said it was
yeah.
a stupid question.
No, nothing's a stupid question. But I think that opens up to where we'd have to have conversations with Robert there to see what that would do. Because I think, as Joe said, that could take away the onus or the enforceability of that.
No, I disagree. I don't think so. I think Sandy could
So
make do.
at the risk of it prolonging this conversation, we have a CAMA training coming up. We have annual training with the Division of Coastal Management. I do expect that training is going to occur in early October. I'm looking for a nod from our community planner just to confirm that. Yes. We could certainly raise this question in the presence of all of the local CAMA LPOs and others that are along the eastern North Carolina coast and see what their position is. And we can bring that back to you maybe at the, depending on the date, we can bring it back to the October meeting, or we can bring it back to the November meeting. I know that the planning board meeting falls on the Wednesday after Jazz Festival, so there's a little bit of stuff going on the week before. If that pleases the board, we can get some more input, see how Kildover Hills and Nags Head and Kitty Hawk are treating their dune walkways without regulations. Are they even looking at them? I don't know. This whole thing with the dune steps and the rails and all that stuff, I can tell you, our building inspector was not expecting DOI to come back and say they need to meet the commercial standard if they're a community access, because that's not how any of the building inspectors treat them. The goal is to preserve our dunes, and if it means we talk about this a little longer, we got a bunch of houses that are under construction, but the dune walkways, they're going to be there, and we'll meet with them on site, and I don't know that they'll be getting done in the next 2 months because we just issued them. For those of you that were at the council meeting, we have like 8 houses that just got permitted. I think 4 or 5 of them are oceanfront. That's where these 18 inches is really going to come into play. And some of them are reusing old walkways, so that may not even be applicable. We'll have to see. But I am happy to pose these questions and get some feedback from my colleagues and people from Division of Coastal Management. They're the ones that write the CAMA regulations that are so ambiguous. There's probably a reason why they were ambiguous, and perhaps that's for that flexibility. But I think we're kind of talking ourselves in circles a little bit, and if it will help us to bring back more information, then let's do that.
Do you think that's valuable? That would be valuable to us?
I can't see it being invaluable. I mean, there's got to be some benefit to having additional feedback. And these are folks that have been doing this for a while. So, and we'll get to talk to some of the CAMA, the people from Elizabeth City.
Yeah, whatever you guys want.
To come to a resolution tonight, I'll pose the question, is it acceptable that we take it under advisement, let Sandy go to the CAMA meetings and see discussions, hear discussions, conversations, and any other information that'll come to us in the next couple of months?
Does it have to be a motion that goes on the floor?
As a formal presentation before us, yes. If the staff can withdraw it, but either one or the other, we can't just act like it's not in front of us.
But we don't have to take action.
It has been presented to us, and we should take some
Action. So, Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion that we defer the the ruling on the 18 inches, and that we allow staff to have conversations with CAMA and do other investigations on neighborhoods, and then come back with more information that will help us make that decision.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? I second. Questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. It carries. Thank you, one and all.
Was there a nay?
And
No, oh, I'm sorry. I thought everyone
So
said aye, so.
We did. I asked just to.
carried 4-0.
4-0.
And what I might also even suggest further, nourishment's getting ready to happen. It might be in our interest to just kind of push it to January and see what happens with the nourishment as well. Is that something that would be acceptable, Joe? I mean, I could probably have something sooner on the elevation, but I think just keep the beach and the dune system on your radar, because it's
Push it to after the.
probably
after
going to be
nourishment.
something we're going to be talking about anyway.
Push it till after the nourishment?
Yeah, that's going to be late. That's a good idea.
Randy, since you made the motion, is that acceptable?
Absolutely. I can modify my motion that we wait till the decision after. We'll take information, discuss that, but wait for a decision till after beach nourishment is done.
Until a later point.
Yep, at a later point.
And as the person who seconded the motion, that's fine, so that's the way the motion, the order should read. Thank you. Moving right along. Approval of the minutes from the August 10, 2022 meeting. You all have seen that in the minutes in your package. Any discussion regarding the minutes?
No discussion. I would suggest that we pass that. But that was only the first.
Yeah.
A, pass A. Good.
I assume that's a motion?
I second.
Is there a second to Joe's motion?
It is,
he
I
did.
second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It is the second.
The motion was made by Joe and seconded by Randy that we approve the minutes of the August 10, 2022 meeting. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. That's, and no is obviously no, so it's 4-0 to approve the minutes. 4B, minutes of the August 19, 2022 meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the August 19 special meeting minutes as presented.
Can I suggest that instead of using the word accept, that we approve?
That's fine.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly second that we approve the minutes of the August 19, 2022 meeting. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, nay. The motion carries 4-0. Item 5 on the agenda, staff comments.
I'll make this really quick. Resort Realty passed 4-0. I'm sorry, 4-1. The stormwater zoning text amendment passed 5-0. The Dune walkway elevation as it relates to setbacks passed 5-0. Project updates, beach nourishment is going to happen mid-November to mid-December. Brick grant is still pending, and the duck trail improvements are still pending as well. And Joe has something.
We also want to be sure you have with your calendars, October, I believe it's the 19th and 20th. The town council will be undergoing their visioning, Vision 2032. So they'll be working with a consultant on that over a day and a half. And I believe that's the 19th and 20th of October. So please put that on your calendar. We'll remind you at the next meeting, but it's a very important document for us because it sets a big general framework for what do we want to be as a community 10 years from now. And that, all the ordinances that we adopt, projects that we approve, grants that we undertake, all of that is going to be consistent toward reaching that vision. So again, to the degree that you're available, if you can, you're welcome to sit in on that, and the council will be engaging in developing that vision for 2032. And Councilman Whitman, you had something to add to that?
No, what dates did you give?
I believe it's the 19th
Correct.
and the 20th.
I misunderstood what you said, I'm sorry.
Okay. And I also want to let you know that the town is going to obtain the services of 2 interns from First Flight High School, one of whom will be specifically focusing on planning activities, dealing with the community development department. So you may see a new face. We'll introduce her at a future meeting, but she's going to give us an extra set of hands to work on some significant projects that we've got coming up. So I want to let you know that as well.
That's all we have.
Sandy, if you could send out just a very short one-paragraph memo that summarizes the meeting.
Yes, we can take care of that. I'm actually on vacation today and through Monday, so we'll get that out to you early next week.
Thank you.
Timed off like this. Thank you, Jim. Board comments.
What are we doing?
Moving to
Oh,
You want to start?
I'm good.
I
You only be stupid once.
I have a comment, and I will have a couple comments, actually. First of all, I'd like to say, Joe Hurd, really great to see you here, and back in kind of the swing of things, so enjoyed that. And the other thing I'd say, on our next meeting, I will be out of town and not be able to attend.
Thank you. I have passed each of the board members, and I have a copy for the record for Sandy. And I will read from the town bylaws ordinances, page 159, which is a discussion of group development projects. It is 156.059, maybe I'll 156.059 group development projects, section B, section 2, off-street parking and loading facilities. Off-street parking and loading facilities established in connection with a group development project shall be of a design, location, and arrangement as will not interfere with the efficient flow of traffic through the area and as will not interfere with the access of emergency or service vehicles. I raise this because I was unaware of this provision, and that's my fault, but I don't know every provision in our town ordinances. When we had the discussion of Resort Realty Project, last month. The representation was made to the board that the project complied with the town ordinances. This was by the applicant's choice, a group development project. And the staff talked about it, principally the consultant to the staff, or to the town. So when I say staff, I'm including the consultant. And for the purposes of emphasis, let me read this yet again. Off-street parking and loading facilities. Off-street parking.
Can we give him another Sandy Whitman's?
You're welcome. He's going to give you a new one.
Thank you, Sandy. Off-street parking and loading facilities. Off-street parking and loading facilities established in connection with a group development project shall be of a design, location, and arrangement as will not interfere with the efficient flow of traffic through the area and as will not interfere with the access of emergency or service vehicles. Frankly, and again, I read this after our last meeting, the meeting in which the board approved the Resort Realty project. I was flabbergasted when I read this. I think for the representation to the board that it complies with the town ordinances is way off base. Clearly, if there was no other provision whatsoever, it is in violation, the approved project, of this provision of the town ordinance. If there was no other provision that it was in conflict with, it is clearly in conflict with this. I think the board, I certainly want to hear, and I think the board should hear a straightforward presentation from the staff representing the facts as they are. Not the facts as someone would like to color them to be, and not the facts as someone would represent them to be because they're an advocate for the applicant. But I expect, as a member of the board and as the chairman of the board, the staff presentation to be straightforward, factual, and not color the truth, which I think clearly happened in this instance. I don't see how anyone with a straight face can say that this group development project, meaning Resort Realty, would not interfere with the efficient flow of traffic. We spent 2 meetings talking about the fact that there was not a turning lane there interfered with the efficient flow of traffic. So I want to go on record as being very uncomfortable with the staff recommendation at our meeting, and I just don't want to be in a position of having to look through, under, and sideways at a presentation by the staff which colors the truth. Those are my comments.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would say is I disagree with that.
Okay.
Are you speaking as for the board, or are you speaking as James Schofield with that statement?
I'm certainly speaking as James Schofield. I haven't asked for board action. So as the representative of the council, you can consider it as you like. Any other comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion for adjournment?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, one